Hey guys, so I wanted to make a quick video kind of outlining some of the mistakes that I've seen a lot of Western Arcanas make, even Korean Arcanas, honestly, um, and kind of how to fix your rotation, make your Empress Arcana start doing more damage. This is going to be a lot of bouncing back and forth between Excel spreadsheet DPS and rotation stuff in Trixion. So if you're really into numbers and wanting to min-max your Arcana and understand the reasons why certain cards have values and really how to start MVPing essentially, then this might be a good video for you to watch through. It's potentially going to be a little long, but hopefully you stick around and I can give you some stuff that you didn't know about the class potentially. So the first thing I want to talk about is skill prioritization. This is something I see a lot of Arcanas mess up on Empress specifically, and the easiest way I think to kind of exemplify this is, and this is my my spreadsheet that I'm messing with. Is looking at the damage of different skills. So this is my current setup on the left side here. I've kind of taken a Korean calculator, translated all the English, and this is post-patch, but a lot of the stuff is going to be the same. The only things that really changed for a lot of these skills that I'm currently looking at is just like a little bit more damage, right? But the basic fundamentals of this are going to be exactly the same. So when I'm looking at just Serendipity, the base expected DPS value of Serendipity versus Secret Garden and Celestial Rain, you'll notice that, hey, when I'm looking at how to prioritize the skills on my bar, it should be pretty obvious. Like I want to hit Celestial Rain first, Secret Garden next, and then Serendipity if neither of these are available. You'll notice that when you start using Return, it gets even more value. And the reason for that is Serendipity has a tripod that gives it a shit ton of crit damage, right? So when you're looking at Lucky Blow, when you start adding it up with the additional crit damage from Return, you start getting decreasing effectiveness there. So when we look at our efficiency tables for Secret Garden and Celestial Rain, you'll notice that you get about 34-35%, and you're only getting about 10% on Return for Serendipity. So I feel like most of you probably know the basic rotation of Arcana is trying to hit Return, and then within this exposed darkness buff for 5 seconds, you want to hit 2 ruin skills, right? So the issue is I see a lot of people using too much Serendipity, and we'll talk a little bit more about like when I should be using it and when it doesn't make sense to use it. And then we'll look at a quick rotation as well for skill prio. So looking at what I'm running, I'm literally just using like Helton build, right? So just standard 3-3-3-3-3 across the board. And all 8 gems. So this is just Helton build, all level 5 tripods, spec crit, no card set, anything like that, right? So I'm doing exactly the same thing in my character settings here. Trying to replicate it as well as add the spirit absorption for yearning effect. So this should work. All these tips should work if you're trying to bring your Arcana into hell modes, or if you have 7+ cooldown gems, this should work the same as well. So the basic rotation is obviously you want to have your enhanced magic addiction, right? Make sure you're not losing out on your nightmare buff, so you have to ult. But the basic rotation here is 2 stack skills, Return, 1 ruin, and then Secret Garden. And then you kind of just wait around a little bit. And then one thing I'll see a lot of inexperienced Arcanas do is Serendipity here, right? If you looked at my cooldowns, it was very tempting to just hit Serendipity here. So I'll show you what happens if you do that. So I'm just going to do what I see most Arcanas doing on the Western servers here in a second. And I'm not going to use any cards or anything. I'm just going to look at the basic rotation. I see a lot of them very excited to hit Serendipity here. And then they do this, right? And now you are waiting to rain. And you've like kind of wasted a lot of the damage. Or not damage, but you've wasted a lot of time on this rain stacking, like, because you got to stack back up to hit rain. And you're not really getting that much value adding the Serendipity versus just, hey, getting my rain, like hitting it off cooldown. So really what you want to be going for, and this is like kind of the standard ideal rotation for Empress Arcana, not looking at cards, right, is rain, and then garden, and then draw cards or whatever, right, waiting for my stack skills to come off. And instead of using Serendipity here, wait a little bit, and then use Return, Garden, and then you should be able to rain before this buff comes off. And now, On the second cycle, right, there's a huge amount of time on rain here. So now you have time to hit Saren. And you'll have plenty of time to restack this, right? And now we start from the beginning, right? So in a very ideal world, what you want to be doing is rain, garden, garden, rain, and then the last one is garden, Saren. So don't fall into the trap of hitting Serendipity just like off cooldown. You'll lose a lot of damage, and we'll kind of go into that a little bit as well. So one, just the base damage, right? So you're like, okay, then if Serendipity is barely ever used, right, and it's used at the very end of my rotation, how do I use it, right? The skill has like no return efficiency. It's doing like half the damage of these other skills. How do I use this? So really the TLDR of Serendipity is it really only gets value when you start adding these cards. So you'll notice that like, hey, if I have Judgment, Conviction, and in return window, Serendipity is fucking pumping compared to these other skills, right? It's doing like twice as much damage as Secret Garden, like probably 1.7 times Celestial Rain, right? So really what I look at Serendipity as is like, use it at the very end of my rotation if I know I'm going to be able to stack and not delay my other cooldowns, or I use it with Cull/Judgment. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that the Cull numbers with return, pretty similar to Secret Garden, so I wouldn't really wait around a ton to use it in that window, but it is something that, return Cull. I wouldn't wait around a ton, so like if I just use Serendipity and I drew a Cull card, you don't have to wait all the way for Serendipity to cool down, right? Because Secret Garden's pretty close overall. It's really when you start adding Judgment and Cull that Serendipity starts performing significantly enough for it to be worth using over Secret Garden. And that's kind of what we're looking at here is efficiency for Cull. So Serendipity gets a shit ton of value out of Cull because you're getting that 100% crit rate. And it's getting a shit ton of value out of Judgment because it's hitting twice. So one thing you'll notice about Serendipity is it hits in two parts. So if it comes with it's going to take a while to draw a Judgment card probably, but the biggest benefit of the Serendipity is both the hits of the Serendipity are going to proc this Judgment, right? So that's kind of where it's getting like a ton of value. And I don't know if I'm ever going to draw this. All right. So if I was just to stack this normally, you'll notice it's 10 mil and then like 370k. But if I use this Judgment card, if I had crit, it would have done more. But yeah, you get the idea. Four ruin procs there on that skill. So another thing for it is not having it when you draw these cards. So if I'm just using Serendipity willy-nilly and I draw a Cull or a Judgment, then I am in the weird scenario where I'm not getting a ton of value out of my Serendipity where I could have been, versus Secret Garden definitely gets some value, but it also still has a pretty high base value, right? I'm not super depressed if I don't get a Secret Garden in my Cull window because it's still getting like okay value comparatively, but I am pretty depressed if I don't hit the Serendipity in this Cull window because it's like 2.5 times as effective, right? So, and we'll talk a little bit about why holding cards for a while is kind of bad. That is another pretty big mistake, but that is, if I could impart one word of wisdom to all the Arcana players out there recently, it's just please don't use Serendipity until you absolutely have to, which is like, hey, I don't have anything to use and I can restack in time where it's not going to push all my other stuff that does way more damage to the back of my rotation versus, hey, this is when I should be using Serendipity. Understanding that will skyrocket your damage. And then we kind of have to talk about how we have to use these cards and how it changes our rotation. So I kind of showed you a basic, hey, rain, garden, garden, rain, garden, Saren, and then start, repeat, right? That is just like the basic fundamental rotation. And that is something you should practice. And then after you kind of understand how that works, okay, how do I add these other cards in? So one of the big things is, hey, I finally get to use Saren or prioritize using Saren over things like garden when I start drawing these cards. So when I start drawing Judgment and Cull, that's when I want to start pushing Serendipity to the front of my priority queue. You'll notice that, hey, with Judgment and Cull, this now becomes, instead of like a bozo skill, this is now the skill that I want to cast the most in my rotation. So looking at these numbers and kind of studying it and understanding, like, okay, in these scenarios, Serendipity has way more value, gives you a lot more, like a deeper understanding of how this class plays, right? Another thing is getting full value out of 3 Ruin enablers, right? So the TLDR for what I was saying earlier is Judgment, is Seren is OP, Cull, Seren over Garden, but not by much, so don't wait too long for Serendipity if you had just used it for whatever reason. Maybe you countered or something. You don't have to wait the 12 seconds to get the use out of this. But the full value out of 3 Ruin enablers is something big that a lot of people are missing as well when I watch them play. So if I had a 3 Ruin enabler, and essentially what that means is that is either a balance card or a snake card. Both of them allow you to essentially hit 3 Ruin skills inside of a return window. So how this is essentially going to look is, assuming all your cooldowns are up, I use this balance card, and this lets me stack to 4. And I want to hit 3 Ruin skills before this buff runs out, right? And you're not losing a ton of value because realistically, this Seren not being inside this window isn't a huge deal. Like, it's like 10% more damage, but every single thing adds up, right? Where it really becomes an issue and where I really see a ton of people mess it up is when you start adding these 3 Ruin effects, right? Because a lot of these 3 Ruin effects last a long time. So if I look at balance for 30 seconds, right? If I look at Snake, Snake's a little trickier. We'll look at Snake in a little bit and how that looks, but these last for like 15 to 30 seconds. So on a base rotation, this getting 3 Ruin skills in is kind of whatever, right? It doesn't like really impact your damage significantly. It's like 10% or something. It's 27%, but realistically, I didn't compare it to hitting Seren as well. But if I was going to look at, hey, during these 3 Ruin effects, if I drew a Cull, all of a sudden this stuff spikes, right? If I drew a wheel and now I can double Rain plus Secret Garden. If I drew a Cull and now the Seren is getting a ton more value, right? This is where, and this is comparing it to a basic rotation, right? So one thing I want to note here is all my math is based on a double skill rotation. What that means is, hey, with no card effects and no other effects going on, my ideal rotation is hitting a Rain and Garden in 1 return window. So all 3 basic means I'm now hitting a return, a Rain, and a Serendipity inside 1 return window. Or sorry, a Rain, a Garden, and a Serendipity inside 1 return window. So when you start adding these other effects in here, and you start hitting 3 Ruin skills, and you start adding these other cards, that's where you start losing a ton of value if you're not cleaning up your rotation and getting all that off in time. And I know the window can be pretty tight, especially when you start looking at like Snake card. Let me find one. I shouldn't have used that balance, but essentially what this does is, hey, every auto attack becomes 1 stack, right? So I'll just pretend that I didn't use this balance card real quick and assume that how this works is each of these are going to stack 2. So ideally, what I want to do is I want to hit Scratch Dealer on the boss, attack twice, use this, use a Ruin skill, hit this with the extra attack speed from Scratch Dealer, attack twice, Ruin skill, double this because this is faster than auto-attacking twice, and then hit Seren. So that is like the slow motion of what I'm about to do. So now that this balance card is gone, we'll hit our Snake card, get our attack speed buff, right? I like to move into the boss while I do this. And you'll notice if you're fast enough, you'll get that first hit of Seren, which is really all that matters because it's the only thing proccing that Ruin skill. You'll get that first hit of Seren before your return buff comes off. So that is a very tight window. If you don't practice it, you're going to be losing all this value, especially when you start drawing other cards. And that is a huge amount of damage that people are leaving on the table that I'm looking at every single day when I watch people play this class. Cool. So another thing that I see that kind of aggravates me is people sitting on cards too long, and we'll kind of look at the math of this as well. So what I mean by this is a big one is the opportunity cost of sitting on these cards too long. So here's 12K card pulls on our current patch, not the Korean patch. The Korean patch is going to have better numbers, but this is on our patch, right? When we have this max tripod on our Call of Destiny, let me look at our skill tree here. Oops. So quick draw, 40% chance per hit, and then this makes it hit 3 times, right? So at max tripod. So when we look at the math behind this, drawing 2 or more cards is about a 35% chance. So 1 in 3 times you cast quick draw and you have a card just sitting in your thing, you are losing a card, right? And a card could potentially be a good card that increases your damage by however much percent compared to your basic rotation, right? A card, so when I look at good cards, right, I'm looking at, hey, Twisted Fate, Cull, Wheel, Judgment, Balance, Snake, like the cards that will significantly increase your damage versus just your basic skill rotation. And the chance to draw a good card is about 42%, 41.7%. Chance to draw a quote-unquote bad card. So they're not necessarily bad, but they're not as impactful to your rotation, is kind of probably how I should better word that. 58.24%. So when we start looking at 2 card draws versus just one, you're just getting less value, right? You're getting less value because you're not drawing 2 cards if you're holding a card. And then 2, when you're drawing 2 cards, you are increasing your odds of getting a good card when you're drawing 2 cards, right? And you're getting approximately like 24% better odds, right? So if I drew 2 cards at these rates at a 41.76% rate, right? No good cards about 34% of the time, 1 good card about 50% of the time, I guess, and then 17.4%. And you'll notice that drawing 2 good cards is absolutely insane, right? Drawing 2 good cards gives you so much value, right? If you have Judgment Wheel, Judgment Cull, Judgment Twisted Fate, like this is where you make most of your money as Arcana, is executing these, executing actually all of this stuff on the right as well. Executing these rotations with your ruin effects, with all these cards, is where you make all your DPS, essentially. And not having the chance to draw 2 good cards, right, is a big deal. It's a huge DPS loss. And furthermore, when we look at like, hey, if I was going to hold a card, and I'll see people hold Judgment, they'll hold Cull, they'll hold Wheel. They're trying to hit like the jackpot. They're trying to get Judgment Cull or Judgment Wheel Cull. You'll notice that the percentages of these card draws are super low. So if I was going to sit on this Judgment card, there's only like, this is assuming that this Judgment card percentage gets equally distributed back to all these different ones, right? The effective removal, I'm not super sure. What I did for this math was I assumed that, hey, if Judgment is out of the pool, this 5.5% is being equally distributed among all these other cards that are in the pool. That might not be the case. It might be weighted. So if it's weighted, this math is even worse for people holding cards. But I'm assuming in a more favorable scenario, and it was equally distributed, that these are kind of the rough percentages, right? So if I hold Judgment, there's about a 13.5% chance that I'm going to draw a card that really makes that pull, that really kind of pays off that gamble, right? Those are not great odds versus just using these cards individually. Like these cards still get value individually. You have to like look at the opportunity cost of not using these cards and missing out on the value of drawing 2 cards and missing out on the value of drawing that same card, right? Because if I were to use this card and I were to throw a quick draw like a Call of Destiny, there's a chance I could draw that card again, which that chance doesn't exist if I sit there holding it, right? So these are the cards that really pay you off, right? Because things like Twisted Fate, yeah, they're a payoff, but they're not. It's not significant enough to like above a normal rotation, right? Because it's going to be like, I just calculated as a flat 20%, like 0 or 40%, right? But yeah, what else was I going to talk about here? Yeah, this changes even more when you look at 3 ruin effects, right? So if I'm sitting on Cull is getting even more value that I'm missing out on, right? Cull is like twice as effective on this rotation. Cull and Wheel are fucking insane. If I'm sitting on a random card, then I'm not having the potential to draw all these cards if I have one of these 3 ruin effects running, right? So these are just things to think about when you're sitting on cards. You're losing out on a ton of value that you could be getting. This, however, does not mean to never sit on cards. What I mean by that is, hey, sometimes the support is saying like, hey, I'm going to do a 3-bubble Serenade of Courage whenever this thing comes down, like this Vicus pattern stops. And it's like, okay, maybe I'll sit on a Judgment card for that because I'm going to get way more value out of it, right? Just maybe mechs, right? If I'm coming into Vicus Tentacles soon, I know it's a huge pain in the ass to stack and kill the tentacles. Normally, maybe I want to save a balance card or save a judgment card or save a snake card for a couple bars just to make sure that that goes easily. That would make sense, right? But if you're just randomly hoping to draw Cull Judgment or whatever, that is where you're making a mistake. And I see a ton of people do this, and they're leaving a lot of damage on the table doing this. This may change post-patch, which we'll address later when we get these changes, when we start looking at how the star card changed and the Joker card. Also, with the nerf to quick draw, these are all factors that'll change post-patch, but I'll probably make a video whenever it comes down to that period. Another thing is missing value on Twisted Fate and Cull. There's a very tight window on using these things, and what I'll see a lot, that's very fortunate, what I'll see a lot is people will get their 2 ruin skills within this return window, but the Cull is already worn off. So how you fix that is you try to throw the skill, then use Cull. Give yourself a little bit more time. So what you'll see a lot is, I'll mess it up on purpose one of these times, if I can draw it again. It'll work with Twisted Fate as well. Okay. What I'll see a lot of times is if you use this too early, right? So if I were to use this, right, and I'm like anticipating and I go into my rotation and I'm a little slow, there's a chance that I miss this window to hit the Cull, but I still hit this hit it in the return window. So if you miss that, you are losing a lot of value. So if you look at how much more damage a return plus Cull Serendipity is doing, or a Secret Garden is doing, versus just a return window, on my build currently, that is a 7 million damage DPS loss. Or 7 million damage loss, not a DPS loss, but 7 million damage loss, just because I was 1 second late on using that skill within that window. So you have to be cognizant that these cards, like Cull and Twisted Fate, only last 4 seconds. The window's a little tighter, especially if the boss is moving. Make sure you don't overcommit, like commit early and like the boss moves and now you miss it. You want to make sure that you're getting that off because it's a lot of damage. Yeah. Oh, another pet peeve I have when people do this, right? Let's look at the damage on my Awakening with the 4 ruin stack. Okay, I didn't crit, but it hit. Here, let me do unlimited cooldowns. All right, eventually I'll crit, surely. Maybe not. Okay, I'm just not going to crit. But the point that I want to make here is that the effect of this, the effectiveness of this skill is based on your ruin stacks, right? So if I use it at 0 ruin stacks, it does bozo damage. What I see a lot of people do is they see like Korean players do this, but they mistime it. They'll do like their opening rotation, right? They'll do this. They'll do their spacebar cancel, but instead of waiting for this Awakening to hit, right, or waiting at the correct time to proc their barricade, they will Celestial Rain early, and they'll fuck up all their Awakening damage because they hit their Rain too early, and their Rain procs the cards before this Awakening hits. So if you are doing this spacebar cancel, make sure you are waiting long enough so that your Rain doesn't grief the shit out of the damage of your Awakening, right? The ideal way to do it, and this is less of a factor if you're not a Barricade Empress player. If you're not a Barricade Empress player, the safe thing to do is just wait for this to hit and then cast it. If you are a Barricade Empress player and you want this damage buff, I mean, you could do some weird stuff. You can do that to get you can like Serendipity the other direction, potentially, if you're really bad at timing this. Or you have to wait for the very perfect time to drop this Rain. So it is definitely worth practicing because I see a lot of Empress Arcanas mistime this, and especially when you start adding Atropine and stuff like that, you're losing a lot of damage on your Awakening. So just make sure you're cognizant of that. Cool. But yeah, that's kind of just like the basics of what I wanted to cover. I'm going to scroll down. Oh yeah, Mana Addiction versus Endless. When we're looking at star cards, I will throw away star cards whenever possible. I mean, ideally, the way you want to use it now is you essentially try to get the most value out of it by using it after you use rain. I'm trying to draw it, but I'm not going to draw it, I guess. But essentially, it gives like a remaining skill cooldown minus 15% and then MP. So you get a little bit of value when you use it after you start the rain cooldown. So if this judgment card was a star card, I would do rain plus star after I'd use the skill, right? To get some of that value. But the issue with star is it kind of griefs you a lot of times because your damage, your DPM, is way higher in endless, and the class just feels way better when you're not in mana addiction state. So that is one thing I'll tell people about star card is I prefer to just throw it away. So like rather than get that slight cooldown increase if like Volton is phasing and going into a mech, I prefer to just throw the star card away. One, it lets me potentially draw a better card, and two, I really don't like playing Empress in the mana addiction state. Now, this is not to say that mana addiction is always bad. Sometimes it's okay, right? Obviously, the numbers are bigger because essentially endless will just give you lower numbers but way better cooldowns. So you're just like rotating all your stuff faster. You're drawing more cards. You're stacking faster, and your overall DPS is higher. However, mana addiction, potentially if you draw like a judgment card and you have Judgment Cull and you can wait like 2 seconds to go into mana addiction state before using it and popping all your abilities, that might be that's like a good way to use mana addiction. But in general, I prefer being in endless, and your damage is higher typically in endless, outside of like some of those corner cases. But yeah, this is kind of what we covered. I mean, it was a little off the cuff, but I see a lot of people mess this stuff up, and hopefully being able to see the numbers behind, hey, why we start using Seren, when do we use Seren, why are we prioritizing Rain and Garden, how do I fit in more Ruin skills within the 3 Ruin, what other pitfalls are there, all these little things add up on your Arcana, and it's kind of the reason that Arcana has such a bad reputation in the West is because people aren't really doing their rotation correctly. But yeah, I'll do one quick rotation again just to show you guys, and then yeah, I'll call it there. Not serendipitying here, right? Because that's a common pitfall. We have 5 seconds left on Rain, so we know that it will have this cooldown back before that exposed weakness thing is gone, right? If you remember from earlier. So this might be one of the scenarios where you don't hit Seren, right? Because you see your Rain coming off cooldown. So a lot of this class, and I just made a mistake here. I should have waited a little bit longer to get Rain off cooldown, so I didn't miss that. So you really have to have mastery of this class. You really have to understand the prioritization of your skills, because when you add things like moon cooldowns, when you add star cooldowns, you just have to understand the priority rotation. So there are times when you barely ever use Seren ever, unless you're drawing Cull and Judgment. If I kept drawing cooldown cards and I could just cycle Rain and Garden over and over again, that I would do that all day, right? So just keep that stuff in mind when you're playing your Arcana, and hopefully you guys have a better understanding of how to squeeze all the damage you can out of this class. Thanks.